I didn't threaten anyone. I was deeply shocked and hurt by what you and your friends did, how gloatingly you approached the matter, as if everything had been planned in advance. It seemed to me that there was some kind of unspoken agreement between us. I was ready to forgive. I understood minor mistakes, but there must be a boundary, right? However, you stepped over it without hesitation, with the ease with which you can only step over everything that seemed to be important. I said then, I'll forgive everything if you just pay for our food. Don't make a drama out of it. Just leave your wallet and leave. It was only later that it became clear to me how insincere your apologies were. They seemed to stick to your lips, without a spark of real remorse. Empty words, behind which there was only a desire to get rid of the situation as soon as possible. This behavior was not new. It was the same with both Patricia and Scott, the same expression of mocking indifference on their faces, the same cold gleam in their eyes. I remembered their looks, heavy, sharp, penetrating into the innermost thoughts. And it became obvious to me that they did not happen to be in this place at this time. They knew what they were doing. All this is part of an elaborate plan, insidious and even, one might say, sinister. We just sighed, exchanging glances as they continued their rant, pretending that nothing serious had happened. I calmly repeated, leave your wallet and leave. You understand what will happen if you talk, if you try to object. And then Scott, with a sarcastic smile, remarked that he was a whole step above Harry in his workplace. It was an unexpected remark, obviously with a hint, but I just smiled at hearing these empty words. If they were going to act that way, then I wasn't going to hold back. I warned them, are you sure about what you're doing? You'll regret it later. But, of course, they just chuckled, as if I had said something completely frivolous, and, waving me off, began to laugh arrogantly, throwing meaningful glances at each other. In the end, I put my wallet on the table, and they thanked me without hiding their malice, saying that they would give it to Harry later, as a kind of treat, as a gesture of disdainful hospitality. Harry was beside himself, seething with anger, but I put my hand on his shoulder, calming his rage, quietly told him not to succumb to provocations. We left, abandoning them in full confidence that each of them would one day face the consequences. I am Angelina, living a quiet life with my husband Harry and our son Frank. Harry and I met in college, naive and full of hope, and over time we became closer through working together on projects, common aspirations, and mutual understanding. We had so many common interests that it seemed fate brought us together, and soon after graduation we got married, firmly believing that we would always support each other. It was only a few years later that Frank was born to us, our little world, meaning and light in every day. Harry found his calling in sales, and although his career path was not strewn with roses, he went to success firmly and confidently. He always had before his eyes the example of his father, a strong and respected man who ran his own company and was highly respected. Harry was hesitant at first when I suggested the idea of designing for his company. He said that he was not sure that I would succeed, but this time his father, who was visiting us, stood up for me. My father-in-law, a man with extensive experience and a confident view of business, supported Harry in my favor, expressing his firm belief that my work could bring something new. As always, he believed in giving people a chance to prove themselves, especially when you see their determination. I felt inspired, and that same day, staying in my small home studio, I set about designing with full determination to do my best. Harry and I spent a lot of time thinking about every detail, discussing color combinations, compositions, and images that could arouse not only interest but also trust from potential customers. After several sleepless nights and numerous improvements, I finally had a design that I was really proud of. Inspired by the support of my family, I put my soul into the project, and to my joy, he was chosen to promote the new product. When the news came that the design was selling well and receiving positive feedback, Harry and I were overjoyed. We gratefully remembered the advice and support of our relatives, especially our father-in-law, who was happy, as if success had come to him. That evening, after we discussed everything over a family dinner, I realized that this project was a turning point for me, marking my transition from amateur drawing to professional work. Harry was proud to say that in each of my projects there is a special warm sincerity that attracts people. After success, I began to devote more time to web design, which began as a simple hobby and part-time job. Soon my income from freelancing equaled my earnings from my main administrative job, and I decided to take a step towards independence, leaving my previous position to focus on design. Harry was happy to invite me to continue working with his company, helping with the visual design of new products. Meanwhile, our son Frank was growing up. Now, while studying in high school, he has grown into a smart, kind boy, passionate about football. He enjoyed attending the school football club, and this activity seemed to bring him a lot of joy. One day he told me about his friend Kevin, with whom they became close from the first day they both joined the club. Kevin turned out to be a good boy, polite and well-mannered, and I was pleased to see that Frank had a reliable friend. However, his mother, Patricia, sometimes aroused conflicting feelings in me. I met her for the first time at a school open day, and from her confident manner, it was immediately clear that Kevin was her pride and joy. She didn't hold back her emotions, loudly declaring how proud she was of his success, which caused him slight embarrassment. He answered her quietly, asking her not to be so intrusive, but Patricia just laughed and continued to discuss his performance, adding that the other children looked like naughty boys against the background of her son. The room instantly fell into an awkward silence, and I noticed Kevin blush and give her a sullen look. When the meeting ended, Frank and I met in class. I praised him for his presentation and asked if he was ready for the club meeting. Frank replied with a smile that he was going to do his best, and I promised to cook his favorite hamburger steak for dinner to support him in his athletic achievements. He was delighted and left the classroom with enthusiasm, waving his hand at me one last time. At the parents' meeting a little later, we were allowed to choose any places. I sat down in a corner, intending to quietly observe what was happening, when Patricia suddenly came up to me. She resolutely sat down next to him, instantly seizing the initiative in the conversation. "You must be Frank's mom," she said, with an expression of slight superiority, noticing my surprised reaction. Her words literally stunned me. Until now, it seemed to me that all these coffee meetings were just an obsessive display of politeness, but now I saw in her behavior a hidden anger that I had tried not to notice before. What began with light hints and comparisons has now acquired a sharpness and prickliness, an undisguised contempt that breaks through her strained politeness. When Patricia started talking about how she allegedly accidentally found herself in Harry's office after seeing his business cards there, I felt a hot wave of bewilderment and irritation flood my face. She stood in front of me, smiling smugly, and seemed to enjoy the effect her words had. My mind was racing between trying to figure out why she was in our room at all and possible reasons why she might be lying. "Why are you saying this, Patricia?" I asked, trying not to show my confusion. She just grinned, glaring at me with a look that sent shivers down my spine. "You should think about it, Angelina. Sometimes the people you consider friends may not be who they say they are. And, as you can see, I always have access to the information that I need." Her voice sounded threatening, and there was that self-confidence in it that left me with a bad feeling. I tried to keep my outward calm, but inside everything was shaking with anxiety. These subtle hints and overt threats of hers made me wonder how far she was willing to go to assert her superiority, how carefully she planned her every move. All of her friendliness suddenly looked fake, and it became clear to me that for every invitation to coffee and feigned courtesy, she expected to get something in return. When I asked her to leave, Patricia looked at me with a barely noticeable smile, as if this only confirmed her dark intention. As she was leaving, she left. "Do you think that all this is just a coincidence? Trust me, Angelina, everything I do is just the beginning. Remember this conversation, it will come back to you." Left alone, I stared at the door closed behind her for a long time, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. I couldn't believe that one of the few people I trusted and allowed myself to communicate with for the sake of my sons was capable of such a double game. Confusion rose inside me, and in my soul there was a dull irritation at her rude accusations and caustic comments. Later, when Harry returned from work, I decided to tell him everything, from her cryptic hints that he allegedly owed her something, to the accusations she threw in my face when she found herself in our room. Harry listened attentively, his face tensed, and I saw his eyes flash with icy determination when I reached the end of the story. "Did she say she knows my boss?" Harry asked with a note of skepticism, but there was growing concern in his voice. I nodded, feeling relieved that I had finally shared with him everything that was weighing on me. Harry looked away thoughtfully, as if considering her every move, as if it were a carefully planned chess game where the opponent suddenly turned out to be closer than he expected. "We'll see who outplays who," he said, and I felt that his calm, confident decision gave me confidence. I felt an icy cold build up inside me, and then, slowly and heavily, anger mixed with bewilderment. Patricia's words made me dizzy, and for a moment I lost the ability to answer anything. Harry seemed just as shocked, his eyes narrowed slightly, and his gaze became tense and focused, as if he was preparing for a fight. Patricia was standing in front of us, with a slight smug smile, as if she was particularly pleased to see us in this position. And Scott, this tall, confident man, frowned, not out of embarrassment or shame, but rather with the impenetrable air of a businessman accustomed to pressuring others to achieve his goals. "I'm sorry, I probably didn't hear you," I said, trying not to show my confusion. "Do you want us to leave the wallet?" Patricia grinned, her gaze became even more caustic, and an almost childish gloating played in it. She slowly ran her hand over the snow-white tablecloth, as if assessing everything around us, and then glanced at Scott, as if they shared some special game that only they understood. "Oh, Angelina, don't pretend you don't understand. Just go away. Get out of Harry's life and everything will be all right. Surely you don't want your husband to run into difficulties, right?" Harry looked like he wanted to intervene, but I put my hand on his shoulder, restraining him. At that moment, it became clear to me that Patricia was up to something more than just a scandal at dinner. This woman was determined to ruin our lives and enjoy every minute of the process. "And what are you going to do if I don't give in to your pressure?" I asked, trying my best to keep my tone calm even though my heart was pounding in my chest. Scott and Patricia looked at each other, as if anticipating our further reactions, and Scott replied with deliberate nonchalance. "In that case, Harry can forget about his promotion. And not only. It's a big company, and I'm the key person in it. It happens that people who start quarreling with the planning department they disappear. In the corporate sense, of course." Harry's eyes flashed with rage, but he restrained himself without saying a word, although it was obvious how much he wanted to answer. And I looked at Patricia and Scott, full of their unreasonable confidence in their own power and influence, and realized that this was far from a joke or a misunderstanding. We found ourselves in the middle of someone else's intrigue, trapped by the crazy idea of Patricia, who decided that she had the right to interfere in our lives. Summoning all my willpower, I looked at her coldly and said, "Your request, Patricia, is absolutely unacceptable. Perhaps you are used to being always inferior to you, but I am not the one who will succumb to threats. If you think you can destroy our family for the sake of your whims, then you are mistaken." Patricia's face changed slightly, her smile became even wider and colder, and a gleam of triumphant superiority appeared in her eyes. "Well, Angelina, I warned you. And now that you've turned down my offer, I'll do my best to make sure you remember that." When we entered the room, we immediately felt tension, as if the air had become dense and viscous. Harry, restraining his emotions, looked at Patricia and Scott, who had been confident of their impunity until that moment, but now their smug smiles had faded slightly. Across from them, on the other side of the long table, were the company's senior employees, Mr. Bryan from the planning department and his colleague from the top level of the sales department. In the armchair, facing Scott, sat Harry's father-in-law, a man with a noble gray face and attentive, penetrating eyes. Scott, clearly not expecting to see so many important people here, began to nervously shift from one foot to the other. He tried to smile, but his uncertainty was evident in every movement. Patricia was also losing her composure. Her eyes, which usually expressed disdain and superiority, now darted from side to side in search of support. Mr. Bryan, Harry's father-in-law, broke the silence. His voice was deep and calm, but there was an undeniable firmness in it. Maybe you can explain what's going on here? Scott tried to pretend he didn't understand what was being said, but a nervous grin gave him away. Well, we were just having dinner, he said, trying to make his voice light. Just a small informal meeting. Mr. Bryan raised an eyebrow coldly. I don't think it's dinner. And I don't think that such conversations, accompanied by threats, are what we encourage in our company. Patricia was about to object, but Harry's father-in-law looked at her in a way that took her breath away. We always try to create conditions for honest and respectful work, Patricia. I am very disappointed that instead of solving problems professionally, you allowed yourself to resort to manipulation and intimidation. Scott, feeling the situation slipping out of his hands, tried to persevere. Listen, Miss Angelina, Miss Patricia, he turned to us, trying to play the role of an offended but noble man. This is a misunderstanding. It's just a misunderstanding. I think something happened here, a mixture of interests. But Harry's father-in-law didn't let him finish. Scott, your planning department is known for its integrity. And I am sure that your desire to advance and ambitions are clear. But no career goals justify trying to intimidate or manipulate people. Unfortunately, we are now faced with the need to consider your behavior not only as a personal misconduct, but also as a violation of the ethical standards of the company. At that moment, Harry spoke. His voice was quiet, but there was a confidence in it that was missing when we arrived at the restaurant. Scott, I appreciate the pursuit of success, but the company has limits, and they should be respected. The family business created by my father-in-law is not only a business, but also our life. What you are trying to do goes beyond any acceptable behavior. The room was filled with oppressive silence. As soon as my father-in-law's words hung in the air, I noticed how Patricia and Scott were gradually losing confidence, barely holding their wary bravado. Vulnerability and helplessness appeared on their faces, expressions that are difficult to hide when your whole game is revealed and even your allies turn away. My father-in-law, leaving a short pause for drama, calmly continued. Patricia, Scott, perhaps you should understand that the reputation and trust of the company are built on joint efforts, not on intrigue and envy. His voice was calm, but every phrase hit exactly the target, reminding that at this table he is a person whose opinion is significant and weighty. Scott finally tried to justify himself. Well, sir, you probably understand. There's competition in the company too, and it just seemed to me that Harry was getting too many privileges. His work with the designer, the fact that the company chose your family. Don't be impertinent, but it looks like... Like what? Harry's father-in-law raised an eyebrow sharply, his gaze cold and penetrating. How is an honest choice of talents? How is the choice based on professionalism and merit? Did you seriously believe that these were personal privileges when it came to your inability to build effective interaction with your team? There was absolute silence in the room. Patricia, realizing that Scott was slowly and steadily trampling their plan into the mud, quickly interrupted him. I'm sorry, sir. Of course not. We probably misinterpreted the situation. It's just that we've been working on this project for several months now, and the news that the designer is someone Harry knows has kind of confused us. She spoke haltingly, trying to please, her gaze darting from Mr. Bryan to Harry's father-in-law. My father-in-law nodded softly, letting her finish, and then continued with restraint. This is understandable, but I would like to emphasize that every employee deserves support and respect, regardless of personal connections. Harry chose this project because he saw talent, not a family advantage. You, Patricia, could use this opportunity to take part in the work and broaden your horizons, rather than engage in intrigue. Scott, trying not to lose face, raised his voice again. But look, even if that's the case, someone should have warned us that competitive projects require a different approach. He paused, realizing that the support of the audience was clearly not on his side. Harry and his father-in-law only exchanged a glance, not deigning to reply to this statement. Then my father-in-law spoke calmly again. His tone was cold but not derogatory. Envy is an insidious ally, gentlemen. And such attempts at manipulation are completely unacceptable. If you lack the skills to support the company and its people, to work in a team, perhaps you should think about changing your responsibilities or priorities. Mr. Bryan wearily raised his hand, gesturing to stop the fierce exchange of accusations that poured one after another, like sparks from a bonfire, inflaming an already burning conflict. He looked not only disappointed, but also as if he was deeply tired of everything that was happening here. Scott, Patricia, your words are an empty echo, an echo of your own short-sightedness and vanity, he said with a composure that sent an almost palpable chill through the room. The confession has already been made, and there is no doubt left. Did you really think that such machinations could escape the attention of a company that has built its reputation on the principles of honesty and professionalism? Patricia, as if knocked down, looked down and pressed her fingers to her forehead, as if trying to concentrate and make sense of what was happening. However, neither awareness nor remorse could change the fact that everything was now revealed. Scott, on the other hand, was still trying to cling to the slightest hope of salvation. He jumped up, his voice trembled, he convulsively tried to justify himself, but the words broke off, seemed unconvincing and empty. This can't be happening. This is a mistake. He tried to protest, but his voice sounded weak and almost desperate. Mr. Bryan was no longer going to enter into a dialogue. He looked at the guards who were on duty at the entrance to the restaurant. Hand them over to the police, there's no need to delay, he said shortly. When the guards confidently headed towards Scott and Patricia, they finally wilted. All their self-confidence had melted away, and they looked like children caught in a prank too big and too thoughtless to be written off as a joke or misunderstanding. Harry's mother, who had been watching the proceedings with angular calm, sighed and then turned to Mr. Bryan with warmth and gratitude in her voice. Thank you for allowing this to be resolved here without attracting attention. I know this is an unpleasant situation for everyone, but now it can be dealt with, and I hope that this will be a lesson for those who thought they could play with the trust and honor of the company, she said. Harry, who was sitting next to me, sighed too, but his face remained firm, albeit a little tired. He looked at me, his eyes expressing both relief and alarm. It was inevitable, he said quietly, so as not to distract the others. They created a trap for themselves. The next day, the company received news of Scott's dismissal, but Bryan and his team did everything possible to ensure that the incident did not go beyond the narrow circle. They decided to keep it a secret, knowing that reputation is important for the company and Harry's family, and for Patricia and Scott it is a lesson they are unlikely to ever forget. Patricia's parents visited us at home a few days later. They came with apologies and remorse, as if hoping to atone for their daughter's mistakes. Their humility and sincerity were obvious, and I realized that it was a heavy blow for them. My father-in-law, despite the severity with which he met Patricia herself, showed generosity and accepted the apology. Over time, the situation around Patricia and Scott began to subside. They left the city, and their son, Kevin, stayed with Patricia's parents, where he found the peace and care needed after the experience. Frank told me that Kevin is doing well in school, and his friends love him for his kind disposition and honesty. This boy turned out to be stronger and wiser than could have been expected, and every time I watched him come to our house and play merrily with our children, I felt a quiet joy and hope. Now I couldn't help but think that, no matter how bitter the past, present, and future may be, we can choose how to respond to this challenge.